Welcome back to today's video. In today's video, I want to be taking a look at Donald Trump and the fact that Donald Trump has a very easy path to reaching 270 electoral votes in the 2024 election. Let's go right into today's video. Welcome back to today's video. In today's video, we're taking a look at Donald Trump, and Donald Trump has a very easy path to 270. It's going to be the subject matter of today's video. So taking a look at this here, taking a look at some particular polls here in the state of Nevada. Now, what I want to focus in on today's video specifically is a 5-way, 3-way, 4-way, 6-way race. Because the fact of the matter is that this race is not going to be a head-to-head Trump and Biden rematch. It's going to include independent candidates such as RFK, Green Party candidates such as Jill Stein, other independent candidates such as Cornel West, and Manchin, probably Joe Manchin may be running as well in the No Labels Party, which is an independent party there. He may be running in that party. So it will include, obviously, an array of candidates. And we want to be taking a look at that array of candidates rather than honing ourselves in on just a 2-way matchup. So taking a look at this poll here, we see here that in a 5-way race, including Biden, Trump, Kennedy, Stein, and West, we see here that Trump is ahead by approximately 12 points. Now, 12 points is quite a lot for him in that particular poll, because when we look at the polling data in other polls, Trump is leading also by 3 points, 5 points, and 4 points. But what I really want to point out is taking a look at this 4 years ago, Trump was leading behind Biden, by 5.3%. In the actual election here, we can see here in the state of Nevada, Biden ended up leading by approximately 2.4%. Whereas in most of the polling data in the lead up to the election, Biden was leading by 5.3%. It ended up winning by approximately 2.4%, which is approximately a 2-point increase for the former president in the particular election. So when we factor in the fact that the polls overestimated Joe Biden's support by 2% and add that on to the average of these polls, Trump is in a solid position to win the state of Nevada in the 2024 election, considering the fact that it is a swing state. In the state of North Carolina, we see here that in these 4, 5, 3, 6-way races, Trump is ahead by 13 points, 4 points, 11 points, and 9 points, and 9 points, respectively, here in the state of North Carolina. Donald Trump is handily beating current President Biden, although taking a look at this 4 years ago, then former Vice President Biden was beating Donald Trump in the polls by approximately 1.8%. 4 years ago, when the actual election took place, the polls overestimated Joe Biden by approximately 3% due to the fact that Donald Trump ended up winning in the state of North Carolina by 1.3%. When we add in that 3% margin of error in which it overestimated then former Vice President Joe Biden, and if we add that on to the average of these polls, which include that 5-way, 3-way, 4-way, or 6-way matchup, Trump is in a solid position to win in the state of North Carolina. In the state of Georgia, we can see here that in the majority of these polls, excluding the poll right here on the top, due to the fact that the poll at the top shows a Haley matchup, which we will exclude for the purpose of today's video due to the fact that Haley will most likely not become the GOP nominee due to the fact that she's trailing Donald Trump in states like South Carolina. In the state of Nevada, she is not even a candidate, and she will most likely lose the nomination come nomination time. But seeing here at some Biden and Trump 5-way, 3-way, 4-way, and 6-way matchups, Trump is ahead by 8 points, by 7 points, and by 8 points and 8 points, respectively, in these two polls here. Taking a look at this 4 years ago, Biden in most of the polling data was ahead by 1.2%, although when the actual election took place, Biden ended up winning by only 0.3%, meaning that the polls overestimated him by 0.9%. If you were to add that 0.9% to the average of these polls in favor of Trump, Donald Trump is in a safe path to win in the state of Georgia. Moving on here to the state of Arizona, Trump does seem to be ahead in the majority of these polls. Taking a look at this 5-way matchup, Trump is ahead by 8 points. He's also ahead by 6 points in the 3-way matchup. And in another one of these polls here in a 6-way matchup, Trump is ahead by 8 points. And in another poll which shows a 3-way matchup, Trump is ahead by approximately 5 points. Taking a look at this 4 years ago, we can see here that Joe Biden was ahead by 2.6%, whereas in the actual election here in the state of Arizona, right, in the state of Arizona, Biden ended up winning by only 0.6%. Now, this map here shows Biden leading by approximately 0.4%, although I believe it was 0.6%, so there must be something wrong, considering that only 99% of the vote was in when they made this map. But I believe it was 0.6 or 0.4%, somewhere around that margin. But anyways, it was a very small margin that Biden ended up winning in the state of Arizona, and he was leading by approximately 2.6%. So it was in favor of in favor of Biden by approximately 2%, the polling data. So if you were to add that 2% to the average of these polling data, Trump is in a solid position. And by the way, some of you guys might say, hey, the polling data is overestimating former President Trump. How do we not know that? Well, the polling data may let's say, okay, assuming the polling data is overestimating Trump, these margins are quite big. In fact, the margins that Trump is leading Biden in 2024, are actually greater than the margins that Joe Biden actually ended up leading Donald Trump in the state of Arizona. Even going to the state of Georgia, Biden was only leading Trump by 1.2%, and he ended up winning the election. Whereas in current polling data, Trump is leading by even 8 points in majority of these polls. In the state of North Carolina, Trump ended up winning there, so I'm not going to look at that poll. But even in the state of Nevada, Biden was leading by 5.3%. He ended up winning in that state. Trump is leading by even 12 points in some polls, 3 points and 4 points and 5 points respectively. So it definitely is an uphill battle for Joe Biden, and Joe Biden really needs to get everything going in a proper position. If he wants to really end up winning, he needs to get his message out. He needs to get a really strong message out. He has to run on a much better message. The Democratic Party definitely needs some better communications with Black voters, Latino voters, Hispanic voters, really the voter base that gave Joe Biden the election. The reason why Joe Biden won the election was because of the minority population. Now, the minority population was unique in that Hispanics actually voted for Trump by greater margins in the 2020 election. And even though the fact that Joe Biden lost the Hispanic populations by big margins compared to Trump, when you compare it back to 2016, Trump did much better among the Hispanic population. Although Joe Biden had that Black vote, he had that Latino vote going for him, he had that moderate vote. Now that vote is slowly diminishing away for President Biden. And we see here that even in the state of Wisconsin, moving on to the state of Wisconsin, Trump does seem to be leading. We will ignore the poll right here on the top, which shows a Haley matchup in which Biden is leading by 9 points. But in these other polls here, we see that they're even. Trump is leading by 3 points in this particular poll. Trump is leading in another five-way race by 8 points, in another five-way race by 6 points, and in another four-way race by 2 points. Now, in one particular poll, we do see here a slimmer of hope for President Biden that in one of these polls, Biden is leading by 5 points when you account in a five-way race. Although in a majority of these polls, Biden has some catching up to do. Going back 4 years ago in most of the polling data, Biden was leading then current President Trump by 8.4%, whereas in the actual election, Biden ended up winning by only 0.6%, meaning that the polls overestimated then former Vice President Biden by approximately 7.8%. If you were to add that 7.8% to Trump's average in these polls, Joe Biden's chances in the state of Wisconsin are diminishing rapidly. Moving on here to the state of Michigan. In the state of Michigan, Trump does seem to be leading in a majority of these polls. In this five-way race, Trump is leading by 6 points. In another one of these five-way races, Trump is leading by 12 points. Now, this includes, I believe, Liz Cheney. So we're going to try to ignore that poll because I don't think Liz Cheney is running for president. She may announce it. I'm not sure. People are speculating, but I don't necessarily think so. And Trump's ahead by 2 points in one of these polls. Okay, so Trump does seem to be leading in a majority of these polls. Biden is ahead in a head-to-head matchup by 4 points in this head-to-head matchup. It is not a five-way race, although it does give some hope to President Biden. But going back 4 years ago, Biden was ahead by approximately 7.9% according to the aggregate, whereas in the actual election, he ended up winning by only 2.6%, which is, when you subtract it out, it would be approximately 5 points. It overestimated Biden. If you were to add that 5 points to the average of these polls, Trump ends up leading by pretty large margins. In the state of Pennsylvania, it does give much more hope for President Biden here. Going ahead and looking at this at a four-way race, Biden is leading by 5 points in this particular poll. But Trump is leading by 3 points in this five-way race. Biden is leading by 2 points, and Trump is leading by 1 point in this five-way race. And in the head-to-head matchups, Biden does seem to be leading in some of these. Trump ends up leading in one of them only. Biden is leading by 8 points in this particular poll. Biden is leading by 3 points, and they're evening out in one of the polls. Pennsylvania does seem to be giving a slimmer of hope for President Biden. It does seem to be giving a lot of hope for President Biden winning the state of Pennsylvania. Now, going back 4 years ago, the polls had Biden ahead by 4.7%. In the actual election, Biden ended up winning by only 1.2%. So that's 1.2%. So that means the polling data overestimated President Biden by approximately, I would say, 3.5%. So if you were to add that 3.5% to the average of the polls, including a 3-way, 4-way, 5-way, or 6-way matchup, Trump does seem to be ending up winning. Although that being said, it does give a hope for President Biden in winning in the state of Pennsylvania. Filling out our electoral map, it is going to be looking at a Trump victory due to the fact that he is leading in a majority of these polls. When you go back to the 2020 election, when you look back at these particular races, you see that the polls, generally speaking, overestimated then former Vice President Biden. Yet now when we're looking at most of the polls, we are seeing that Trump is in the lead in a majority of these polls. So taking a look at this map here, we're going to be going ahead and giving several of these safe states. Now we'll be going ahead and giving North Carolina, California, several states on the eastern and western coasts, several states along the plains and Midwest region here of the United States. I also have included this pie chart, this circle graph right over here for the individual electoral votes. Obviously, the gray sections are the areas which are toss-up states, which I have not filled in yet, and the blue areas are for the Democrats, and the red areas are for the Republicans, along with their respective electoral votes. So write down in the comment section down below if you want me to include this particular pie chart, I guess you could say pie chart, for these election predictions. This is the first time that I'm using this particular feature of the OMPS website. So please write down below whether you guys want me to use that or whether you guys say that we should not be using that. So that is for the state of Utah, obviously, with this heavily Mormon population. State of Illinois, I do believe that will be going solidly for President Biden. It is experiencing some immigration housing problems, although I do believe that it will go solidly for President Biden. Moving on here with the state of Indiana and Iowa, solidly for President Trump there. The state of Ohio will go likely for President Trump due to the fact that it did vote to append abortion restrictions. So it voted to get rid of abortion restrictions for individuals in the state of Ohio, for women in the state of Ohio, whereas in the state of Iowa, which is a much more conservative state, they voted to enact abortion restrictions. Whereas in the state of Ohio, we may be seeing some liberal tendencies after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. In the state of West Virginia, we do see that it will go to the former President Trump. In the state of South Carolina, home of former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley and former current Senator Tim Scott there, who has endorsed former President Trump. In the state of Colorado, it will vote solidly for Biden. Going back 4 years ago, Biden won in the state of Colorado by an extremely large margin, by around almost 14 points. I would say around 13.5%. So that is an extremely large margin there in the particular swing state of Colorado. So in this particular swing state of Colorado. Now in the state of New Mexico, on the other hand, I will be going ahead and giving it by a likely margin, which likely is a pretty good margin. And going back to 2020, Biden ended up leading by approximately 11 points. Still is a pretty good state for President Biden. I will be going ahead and giving it as being likely, though. In the state of Texas, it will be going as being likely. In the state of Florida, likely. Obviously, Ron DeSantis ended up winning in the state by 20 points. We saw there that several other candidates ended up winning. Marco Rubio obviously ended up winning by a large margin. Trump ended up winning by 3.5%. It is becoming a pretty strong Republican state as the years go on. It obviously added an electoral vote. Before it was worth 29 electoral votes when the 2020 election took place. Now it's worth 30 electoral votes. The state of Texas was worth 38 electoral votes in the 2020 election, whereas now it is worth 40 electoral votes. The state of California was worth 55 electoral votes in the 2020 election, whereas now it's worth 54 electoral votes. So that's some interesting thing to note there. Even in the state of New York, in the 2020 election, New York was worth 29 electoral votes. Now it's worth 28 electoral votes. So you're obviously seeing how these liberal states are losing electoral votes, making it once again harder for President Biden to win the 2024 election, whereas many of these Republican states are gaining electoral votes. That being said, Ohio actually ended up losing an electoral vote. So that will be definitely hurting Republicans in the future. Moving on here, let's go ahead and take a look at the state of Hawaii. Will vote solidly for President Biden. And also in another state here, the state of Alaska, will vote likely for the former president going back to the 2020 election. We saw here that President Trump ended up winning by approximately 10% in the state of Alaska. So it is not safe, I would say. We're going to go ahead and put it as being likely. Moving on here to the state of Virginia. In the state of Virginia, we will be going ahead and giving it. We'll keep the state of Virginia for now as being not put yet. But in the state of Nebraska, we will be going ahead and giving 3 of the congressional districts to Donald Trump as being safe, amounting up to 4 electoral votes there in the state of Nebraska. Moving on here with several of these other states here, the state of New Hampshire, going back to the 2020 election, Joe Biden ended up winning in the state of New Hampshire by approximately 7.3%, which is an extremely large margin. We will be going ahead and giving the state of New Hampshire to President Biden by a likely margin. Moving on here to the state of several states here, the state of Nevada will vote tilt for President Trump. Moving on here, we're going to go ahead and give Arizona as being tilt for President Trump. State of Georgia, tilt for President Trump. The state of Wisconsin is being tilt for President Trump as well. We obviously looked into why that explanation would take place. Joe Biden will end up winning in the state of Minnesota by a tilt margin, Virginia by a tilt margin, Pennsylvania by a tilt margin as well. Donald Trump will end up winning in Michigan by a tilt margin and in the state of North Carolina by a tilt margin. Biden will win one of the congressional districts in the state of Nebraska, going back to the 2020 election when we're looking at that particular state there. Now, this is the full details. We'll go into the full details here. Let me just go ahead and zoom into this. I have not looked at this actually, but we can see here Trump ended up winning 4 electoral votes. Biden ended up winning 1 electoral vote, and I do not believe that we can actually see the individual counties, which is what I thought we could see, but I don't believe we can look at that. Sorry about that for a second. Sorry for that confusion, but I do have that on the top of my head. Biden ended up winning in that particular district by around 6 points, so it will go to current President Biden by a tilt margin. Moving on here, Donald Trump will end up winning in one of the congressional districts in the state of Maine. Biden will win in 2 of the congressional districts by a safe margin, amounting up to 3 electoral votes, and Trump will end up winning by a tilt margin in one of the congressional districts, amounting up to 1 electoral vote. Now, that certain congressional district looks relatively large. Although that being said, it does not contain as many people. That's why it only has 1 congressional district. So that is your total for this election here. We have 0 toss-up states left. We can see here that Donald Trump is at 263 electoral votes. Biden is at 245 electoral votes. We looked at several of the swing states. We looked at the 2020 election, looked at the accuracy of polling data, added, subtracted. We did all of that. And this is my final prediction for this election. 293 electoral votes for President Trump, 245 electoral votes for President Biden. If you like this video, guys, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. It really helps out if you're able to subscribe, and it really helps out push this video to more people. It really helps out if you're able to subscribe and like and share the video. And I will see you in the next video. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about one particular issue, and that is the South Carolina primary. I didn't want to devote an entire video for the South Carolina primary. I actually wanted to finish the South Carolina primary in today's video. So let me just talk a little bit about the South Carolina primary. The South Carolina primary rolled around, and we saw that Biden ended up winning in that primary with 96.1% of the vote. Now, if you remember back in the 2020 DNC primary, we saw that Biden actually had South Carolina, and South Carolina actually made Biden go up in the majority of the polls when it looked like at the time that Bernie Sanders would end up becoming the nominee. South Carolina was a state which definitely helped Joe Biden out win the 2020 election in terms of winning that nomination. In fact, if the South Carolina primary had not happened in 2020 for whatever reason in that particular order, you might see Bernie Sanders have become the nominee. So South Carolina is definitely a pro-Biden state. Now, why is it a pro-Biden state with regards to Democrats? Well, the reason why is because you have a heavy black population in the state of Joe Biden, which in the state of South Carolina, not in the state of Joe Biden, but in the state of South Carolina. We saw that black turnout, obviously black registration there in that particular state is much more favorable to President Biden due to the fact that more black people in the state of South Carolina are registered for President Biden, are registered in the Democratic Party. Now, that does show one thing, and that shows that Joe Biden is kind of unifying his base, his key base in the 2024 election. Now, I will want to say another thing, and that is that the turnout in the South Carolina primary was relatively low compared to the 2020 primary. Now, why may the turnout have been relatively low? Well, the fact of the matter is that most individuals know that Biden was going to win that primary, and he ended up winning at the end, so it wasn't necessarily a big deal. And especially with these incumbent primaries, you generally speaking don't see high turnout. But that does show that the Democratic Party is definitely unifying itself around President Biden. And actually, when you look at the majority of the polls, which show black voters and how black voters respond to President Biden, we can see here that in a majority of these polls, Biden actually takes about 87% of black voters. 87% of black voters is, a relatively large number. So it is definitely less than in 2020, where Biden won 93% of black voters. Although 87% of black voters, you have to consider that a lot of these black voters may make up their minds right before election day. They may not like President Biden, but they may end up voting for him because they do not want Donald Trump to become president. Now you could see the inverse effect, kind of, not inverse entirely, but a opposite kind of effect happening within the Hispanic population, where the Hispanic population is increasing their support of Donald Trump. Since 2016, the Hispanic population has been trending more and more towards the right. And we are seeing that obviously within the 2020 election, where Donald Trump won 38% of the Hispanic population. And we are seeing in a lot of these polls that are coming out more recently that number may stay the same or even larger. But this is my final prediction for the 2020 election, for the 2024 election rather. If like this video, guys, again, guys, hit the subscribe button down below and like the video. It'll push out this video to more people if you're able to subscribe and like. And I shall see you in the next video.